Hey Cody, this is Dr. Scott. I have some feedback for you on your rhetorical analysis draft. Just as a quick reminder of the things that I was looking for in this, or actually in the revision, I'm looking at the thesis statement for the paper. The thesis needs to be focused. It needs to address how rhetoric is being used. I'm also looking at the supporting evidence that you use in your essay to support that thesis statement. Are you using research? Are you using examples from the text to support your argument, and are you explaining how those details support that argument? I'm also looking for research that's credible, that's useful. It's not just used as filler or just used in the intro or the conclusion. It's actually throughout the paper, and it's used to support your paper's argument. Also looking at focus paragraphs and organization and transitions. And so there's a lot that's going on in this assignment. I was really impressed that you have a full draft. I think I definitely assign shorter drafts because my hunch is folks are going to need to scrap what they're doing and kind of rewrite. I think that there's some of that that's probably going to be needed for your paper, but I was really kind of impressed that you've got a full draft of the rhetorical analysis. So I'm just going to kind of go through and explain some of my feedback. Some of it was addressed in the videos that I put up last week that were about some of the trends that I noticed in the rhetorical analysis. And if you have any questions, you can follow up and ask me. So I like the tone of the introduction. I like how it sets up, kind of introduces us to Martin Luther King and his movement and what he was trying to work towards. I did think that it probably would have been helpful here in the introduction to explain who the audience was for that letter from Birmingham jail. Right now it feels like this is kind of an introduction to Dr. King, generally speaking, and you kind of need to make that transition to talking about a letter from Birmingham jail much more specifically and who the audience was for that. And I think for the thesis statement, it lacks focus at this point because it's kind of like just that he uses rhetoric, and that's not enough. It's like he uses rhetoric and he's persuasive, and the really important piece that's missing so far in the thesis statement and in the essay so far is the audience. You don't know what audience that you're talking about, so you need to pick rhetorical appeals or rhetorical issues that you think are that make him particularly persuasive to a specific audience. And right now it's kind of a shotgun approach where I see like 5 different rhetorical issues going on, and you're writing about kind of like this generic audience of anybody that's going to listen to or read that letter from Birmingham jail. They're going to get it, and you need to be much more specific. So I think the introduction is a place to kind of set that up. The thesis statement doesn't mention an audience really, and it doesn't really mention the specific rhetorical issues that you're going to write about. I think limiting the number of rhetorical issues you write about would be a good idea, and we can talk about that if you want. But let me go through the body paragraphs and kind of explain some of the feedback that I have. So one of the issues I'm looking for is organization, that you have paragraphs and ideas that are placed in a purposeful way. Like there's a reason you're beginning in one place and then going to another. And for me, I was kind of scratching my head to figure out why you were starting here with alliteration. This is a draft, and it might be something you were thinking like, I will just figure that out for the revision, and that is totally fine. But right now, I'm not sure why we're starting here. And later on, when you have the paragraphs that are about the 3 rhetorical appeals, I'm not sure why you're starting with one and then going to another. So there should be like a purposeful reason why you begin and then go to the next idea and then follow that up. What's the arrangement, and why have you placed ideas in the way that you have them? So alliteration, I think that's kind of interesting. I think with both of these 2 paragraphs that you have on page 2, I wonder if they're really kind of things that are, like you're talking about these things that are kind of smaller, like micro ways that people persuade, and then you're also talking about these bigger issues, and I'm wondering if these are things that you could write about in those larger issues. There's nothing written anywhere that says you can only write about one rhetorical appeal in one paragraph. You can have multiple multiple paragraphs about credibility or emotion. And I think that like this one right here, this is credibility, right? I mean, it's alliteration, but it's also like he's writing to clergy members, white clergy members in Alabama. Using this kind of language, he's speaking that language. Like, it's alliteration, yes, but it's also an appeal to credibility. Consider maybe 2 paragraphs about credibility. And I wouldn't just use one example per each paragraph. Are there other places where he uses alliteration? Absolutely. So kind of maybe rethinking these first 2 paragraphs and where you place them, it might help you with that other issue with organization. Again, I mentioned it in this feedback here about these 2 paragraphs, that issue of audience is going to keep coming up. So why is it important for somebody that is trying to persuade white clergy members, religious leaders in the state of Alabama, why is it relevant that he does this? It's totally relevant. So again, the audience thing should probably be kind of explained a little bit in the introduction, but then probably included in your thesis statement, and then bringing these body paragraphs back to that thesis statement. Well, he's using alliteration and he's using a lot of biblical language because he's persuading people that put a lot of stock in the Bible. Makes a lot of sense. That same feedback, it's also here. I mean, it's going to be relevant in every body paragraph, so I'm not going to beat this up too much. Just know that this is something you'll need to address everywhere, that audience issue. So he mentions you have hateful policemen curse, kick, and even kill your black brothers and sisters. Why is that particularly persuasive to this audience of white folks? Or, you can have multiple audiences, I guess. I would probably urge you to choose one so your essay doesn't sprawl. You've already got a lot of writing here. You don't need to tack on a bunch of things to the thesis statement and say you're going to write about 5 rhetorical issues. Again, I think trimming it down it's going to make your essay much more effective. But if you kind of think about like, what is he doing here? I mean, this might be an appeal to emotion, and it might be an appeal, and what emotion specifically? I think guilt. These are your brothers and sisters, and you're leaving them alone. I think that he's doing something here with this, with that alliteration. So these 2 paragraphs, like, I like that you're working with that kind of stuff. I don't know why it's placed earlier in the essay. I think it's also something that can help you out with body paragraphs. I think what you could do is you could develop and have multiple body paragraphs for emotion or for credibility or for logic, and maybe you choose just 2 of those rhetorical appeals, and then you kick to the curb the one that you'd feel less comfortable with. That's something that you might consider doing. Something that I'm noticing later on in the essay is that, again, the audience issue kind of keeps coming up, and related to that is the lack of research. I think in a draft, it's fine to just kind of get ideas down on the page, but the problem with a rhetorical analysis is that you're making an argument about how persuasive Martin Luther King was for that time, and that takes a bit of research to determine that. Martin Luther King is not the kumbaya person that people perceive him as now. At the time, he was very divisive, and he angered a lot of people. So, and a lot like folks around the way folks unfortunately think about Black Lives Matter, they kind of assume that they're all agitators and they're all just trying to be violent or anything like that. That's not really the case, but the common perceptions that people have about Black Lives Matter is it's kind of similar to the way folks thought about Martin Luther King back in the day. So looking at opinion polling, looking at editorials from newspapers, doing some research about Martin Luther King and how people perceived him back in the 60s, it's going to help you make a better case for why you think he was persuasive and help you better understand why he was doing the things that he was doing in the letter from Birmingham jail. So that research idea, it really needs to get into the next revision. One thing I do like about your essay is that in some of your body paragraphs, you're trying to use more than one example per paragraph. And that is something I've been harping on with a lot of folks. They have one example, very quickly try to explain it or don't really explain it all that much, and then they're off. It's a drive-by analysis. you're taking the time to explain how multiple examples work, and I really appreciate that. So I think you're doing a good job there. I think there are places though where you could probably spend a little bit more time explaining how these things are working as an appeal to credibility or as an appeal to emotion. So like one place where I see that is here, like with the example of Socrates. I was not really sure how this is an appeal to credibility. Just as Socrates thought that it was necessary to create tension in the mind, and then this appeal to his ethos, to his credibility, because it provides an example that illustrates the fact that the people Dr. King leads are not the only ones who have felt the way they do. I'm not exactly sure how that's credibility. Again, thinking about who his target audience is, white clergy members in the South. Why is referring to Socrates particularly persuasive? Well, maybe because Socrates is a very well respected, he's a philosopher, an ancient Greek philosopher, and maybe King is kind of playing up his education here. Like he's aware of that reference. He knows who Socrates is. He studied him. He has a doctorate in philosophy. So he's kind of showing that to people so that they might be able to trust what he says. That might be just one interpretation. But again, I think the way to kind of think about how to piece together your paragraphs is provide an example, explain why that example is ethos, pathos, or logos, explain why it was particularly persuasive to that audience, give another example, explain how that example differs from the first one, and then go through the same pattern. Why is it ethos, pathos, logos, and why is it particularly persuasive to that audience? That's really kind of the pattern to kind of think about throughout the rest of your essay. If I'm honest, I think the logos paragraph was probably the weakest link there. I wasn't sure how these things were working as logic. Just because things might seem like they're commonsensical, it seemed like that's what you were trying to argue. I don't know if that really kind of holds up here. You can definitely write about logic. I'm just not seeing the explanation for how these things are logic. Maybe having the basic 4 steps, it was really easy for them to follow. People in the audience are going to be able to follow what he does. I guess that's a way that you could do it. It's structured. The letter is structured in a very logical and persuasive manner. That could work, but right now I'm not seeing the logic paragraph. For me, was the weaker link of the essay. Last thing, super long video already, but I think you might kind of set up your essay in. It seems like you think he's persuasive. You might kind of structure the essay by where he was most persuasive to least persuasive, or vice versa. It seemed like that might be a better way to kind of set it up as compared to this was easier to spot. That didn't seem like such an effective way to kind of structure or arrange the paragraphs. And I think that's it. Gosh, I have more to say, but I think that is plenty of feedback already. So if you have questions about this, reach out to me and let me know. I'd be happy to chat with you a little bit more about this feedback, or answer any questions, or talk to you about your revision ideas. But right now it's the research and audience issue. That's the big thing. So that's it for now, Cody. I will talk to you soon.